Welcome to the Soundbite, a quick recap of the week's events for the week of February 3rd, 2020. Let's start by talking about the terrible week this has been for the Democrats, and we'll start with the Iowa caucuses. This event is traditionally the launching point of the primaries and generally gives insights into who will eventually win the nomination for the presidency. This entire process was a train wreck in terms of organization and voter turnout, and there were also several reports that the new mobile app that was being used failed in spectacular fashion. Even mainstream media outlets on the political left didn't hold anything back and continually leveled harsh criticism at the Iowa Democrats. As I record this, the results are still not final. However, Pete Buttigieg is leading Bernie Sanders by 0.1%, with Buttigieg having 26.2% and Sanders having 26.1%. Warren is in third with 18%, and Biden is a distant fourth with 15.8%. This is a precarious position for Democrats, as Joe Biden was believed to be the moderate voice, as his opponents are being cast as radicals. Indeed, the likely outcome appears to be that Sanders will go on to win in New Hampshire next week, and then possibly Nevada thereafter. If this trend holds true and there's no other legitimate contender that comes along, then cue the fat lady, because it's pretty much over. In the aftermath of such a primary win, the United States will then have to grapple with how an open socialist managed to make it on the ballot to become the President of the United States. If this comes to pass, then the Democrats should likely consider a name change. Trump's State of the Union address was well written and delivered to the people. It was generally a feel-good speech that cited a lot of positive changes that have taken place under the Trump administration. The lack of engagement of the Democrats to clap for anything, even issues that have been cornerstones of the Democratic platform for decades, was quite the thing to witness. All they could do was sit there and sulk, and they made no effort to hide their seething contempt for Trump. To cap off the evening was Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, behaving like a petulant child and tearing up her copy of Trump's speech. It truly was an amazing spectacle by the Democrats, and clearly shows that modern medicine is no closer to finding a cure for Trump derangement syndrome, and that more research is needed. Adding to their misery was the impeachment of Trump went down in flames as the Senate voted to acquit. To anyone watching these proceedings, this result shouldn't come as a surprise. The initial vote in the House of Representatives clearly illustrate the partisan nature of what was to come. Not only did the Democrats rush the process, but they went so far as to declare that the case for impeachment was complete and ready for the Senate. When Pelosi finally forwarded the articles of impeachment, the House managers, along with Nancy Pelosi, demanded that the Senate call more witnesses and do further investigation. This was a nonsensical approach, as it clearly called into question earlier statements that the Democrat case for impeachment was complete and stood on its own. Compounding this obvious foolishness was that you had Schiff and Nadler doing what amounted to an Abbott and Costello routine that demonstrated how partisan and illegitimate the whole impeachment process truly was. In the end, the Senate wouldn't have any of it, and they brought these proceedings to a screeching halt. Perhaps the best scene was witnessing Mitt Romney holding back the tears as he voted for impeachment and then trying to justify it. I predict he will face some much-deserved karma at the polls. The only thing that Democrats proved this week is that kindergarten children are more organized, mature, and responsible than they are. When you're trying to prove to the American people that you're the better choice and deserve the vote of the people, being batshit crazy is probably something you should avoid. Back in Canada, the Liberals spent the week on the defensive as well. A recent report from a commission on media, called Canada's Communication Future, was widely heralded by sane people as a massive overstep of government, with Andrew Scheer telling the Speaker of the House that Orwell's 1984 was meant to be a cautionary tale and not an instruction manual for the Liberals. Further, Heritage Minister Mr. Guilbeault spent the last several days walking back earlier comments he made concerning licensing and registration. This was an attempt to ease widespread concerns that the Liberals were going to begin censoring content that they didn't like, and the public backlash was swift and from all corners. Mr. Guilbeault had limited success with walking this back, and the media did a pretty good job challenging him on his statements and what the Liberal plan was going to be. Kudos to Evan Solomon from CTV News for a hard-hitting interview that caused Mr. Guilbeault to retreat, deflect, and give nonsensical responses. When Solomon asked him to explain how the Liberals were going to categorize media content providers and why the Liberals thought that they should be the people to decide which news outlets would be trusted, Mr. Guilbeault struggled to provide any form of coherent answer. This topic is far from over, as the Liberals want to move forward quickly to introduce legislation to act on the recommendations of the report. Coronavirus is still dominant in the news, and Health Minister Patty Hadji was under continued pressure this week about the government's handling of this. This whole thing has been a case study in stupidity and incompetence, and I continue to fail in my attempt to understand why Canada hasn't taken the same approach as other countries who have limited incoming travel from China to avoid the risk of exposure in their own countries. When the government was asked about this, their response was to say that to do such a thing amounts to racism. Not only did this foolishness come from Justin Trudeau, but it's also coming from other politicians within his party and at the provincial and municipal levels. Seems that even coronavirus is based on systemic racism and white privilege. We also learned that part of the plan to bring Canadians home from China apparently requires a US airplane. Seems Canada can't muster the logistical ability to mount our own evacuation and provide a plane to get our citizens out of harm's way. But we can give MasterCard $50 million. We don't have any money for veterans or law enforcement, but we can give a private company taxpayer dollars while ignoring that this corporation has annual net profits measured in the billions. Because after all, it's 2020 and the struggle is real for Liberals. Finally, in what seems to be a rare act of judicial prudence, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled in favor of the government in their bid to get the Trans Mountain Pipeline built. Reactions were mixed, of course, but the construction should finally proceed. Whether the Liberals move forward or not is a different matter altogether. The Liberals are walking a fine line as they must show that they are doing something for the West while also keeping their leftist coalition with the Bloc, NDP, and Green Party happy. I suspect something will come along and provide the Liberals a way out. That's the week as we saw it. Have a great weekend, and always remember that a country without basic freedoms, especially freedom of speech, is a country without a future.